Hi, I'm Aradhna. I am currently pursuing my doctorate studies at University of Oxford with the Faculty of Law. Today, in the first half of my presentation, I would be talking about my research, which is focused upon rape adjudication in India. And the latter half of my presentation, I would talk about the COVID-19 and the shadow pandemic that is rising in India and the responses, at least from the Indian state. To start with, as I said, my research focuses on rape adjudication in India. The starting point of my research was the 2012 protest which happened in Delhi, which is the capital of India. It was in 2012 that a young woman who boarded a bus in Delhi was brutally raped. This incident generated a lot of widespread protests all throughout India as well as abroad. It was these protests, especially from students across universities in India, which led to the formation of a government committee, which was the Justice Verma Committee report. Justice Verma Committee, which was to suggest reforms in the rape law. Now, while the Justice Verma Committee was conducting the studies to look at the situation in India, it was revealed that the rape law, and especially any laws related to sexual violence, was deeply rooted in stereotypes. So the efforts of the committee was to move away from the stereotypical language and the negative stereotypes that are employed in the courtroom, and to move towards recognizing bodily integrity and sexual autonomy. So this is what led to the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013. After a lot of deliberations, the Justice Verma Committee set up a report. While the report was extremely progressive for its time, especially considering the socio-economic differences, considering the caste, class, and various other barriers that India has, some of the key reforms that were suggested by the Verma Committee were actually implemented, and this came about in the Criminal Law Amendment Act. The key reforms was a new positive definition of consent. So all throughout, before 2013, India did not have a definition of consent which was laid down in its legislation, and this was extremely difficult. This made it extremely difficult for victims and survivors to get any justice in the courtroom, because the courts would follow their own definition of consent, which would be based upon the whimsical fancies of the judges, of the prosecutors, etc. So this was a huge achievement to get a positive definition of consent laid down in the law. Another key reform was an expansion in the definition of rape to move beyond looking at it as a penile vaginal intercourse, and there were also various circumstances which were added to the category of aggravated rape. Some of the reforms which I've not mentioned here, but which also played a huge role, were getting provisions such as stalking, sexual harassment, and detailing out and fleshing out these legislations so that there is less room for whimsical fancies of the judges. However, the Criminal Law Amendment did fall short of the goals of bodily integrity and sexual autonomy that it sought to achieve. One of the biggest defeat was the retention of marital rape exception. So marital rape is still not illegal in India, and this was one of the biggest defeat for activists, for lawyers, for people working in this arena. The other was the refusal to make the provision of rape gender neutral, and the retention of death penalty. So with the retention of death penalty and excessive imprisonment, it again reinforced the carceral politics of how rape law is adjudicated in India. I would be sharing now some of the findings from my first year of research. So while there is one positive aspect of it. So the 2013 law really wanted to move away from the notion of the vulnerable Indian woman and how rape scars women, instead of looking at it as an issue of sexual autonomy or bodily integrity. It looked at something which shames the Indian woman. So while such references and phrases are not, in at least in my first year of research, which focused upon judgments from the Delhi District Court, shows that we have moved away from these references which were filled in earlier judgments, which is the pre-2013 law. However, that the new 2013 law, at least in its implementation, has led the courts to create a new profile of the Indian victim, where there seems to be an expectation which is strongly evoked against mature, educated, and professional women, terms that these judgments use, about how they are expected to alert the police or the family at the correct time, and they should have done, being educated and being, and as working professional women, they should have known how to handle the situation better. And any kind of response, it cannot neither be too quick nor too slow, so it has to be in the right amount of time. And I'm still trying to figure out what this right amount of time that these courts are trying to talk about. Some of the other findings from the research are in the total data set of the 82 cases that I had analyzed, it was only 7 judgments which even mentioned the new definition of consent. And even in these 7 judgments, it merely quoted the definition of consent right from the legislation. There was absolutely no discussion. And despite the strong emphasis on bodily integrity and sexual autonomy that the Verma Committee report and the Criminal Law Amendment Act focused upon, the judgments and the courtroom was completely silent on these concepts. And there continued to be an emphasis on absence of resistance. Now, to just point to the fact that absence of resistance was something which was focused upon under the pre-2013 law as well. And in order to move away from that emphasis, it was specifically laid down in the legislation that we should not be focusing upon resistance. However, despite this explicit detailing of it, the courtroom still continued to rely on such factors, which, at least at the end of my MPhil year research, it led me to pointing out that despite statutory reforms taking place and despite making some progress statutorily, the courtrooms, at least in its implementation, was still falling back and still relying on stereotypes. Maybe not the stereotypes they relied on pre-2013 laws, such as how it shames the Indian woman, but bringing about new forms of stereotypes about how professional women are supposed to react and how educated women are supposed to react. And I'm continuing this research in my doctoral thesis and looking at whether we are falling short from, and the problem is the lack of legal education of judicial officers. So I'm trying to deal with the material that judicial officers have access to see as to where we are falling short in its implementation. With that setting, and I would move on to COVID-19 and the rise of domestic violence in India. Just to link the two, even in a non-pandemic setting, as you could see, rape adjudication or any form of sexual violence adjudication is extremely difficult in India. The court procedures take a lot of time. It can get stretched over years to get any kind of justice. And in a system which is already failing, despite legislative amendments, despite progress trying to be made statutorily, the COVID-19 has brought in its wake an increase in the complaints. I hope you can see on the screen some of the figures that I have pulled up, and these are all national figures. And you can see that there has been, some of the newspaper reported that there has been 100% increase. And even not just in pertaining to domestic violence against women, but also the Childline India helpline has been receiving an increased number of calls related to child sexual abuse. There's also been a current Child Protection Fund report, which is in circulation, which is showing that ever since the lockdown has started in India, there has been an increase in demand for child pornography on the online platform across India. To just put things into perspective, as per the Oxford University's launcher, India has one of the most stringent lockdown measures, so there are no relaxations, like, unlike UK, where you are allowed to go out for 1 hour for groceries. The, there are no such relaxations here, so there is a complete shutdown, and there has been an increase ever since. The shutdown started in 25th March and was initially till the 16th of April. However, it's now continued and it is going to be there till the 17th of May. There have been a lot of studies which are being conducted, a lot of reporting that is currently going on as to why the domestic violence cases are on a rise in India. And I have pulled up some of the key points. One being that there is no access to civil remedy protection orders. Now, to just put things in the context of India, Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, which deals with the domestic violence cases, is a civil law case. It incurs civil liability and not criminal liability. And with the shutting of courtrooms, the courts are only open for emergency hearings, such as the bail pleas. So there are no access to protection orders or probation officers right now. Another problem is that India faces a lot of overcrowding in jails, and with the COVID-19 pandemic, and some incidents being reported that jails have noted COVID-19 positive patients, there has been an increase in the parole being granted to prisoners and under trials, as the jails are just not able to accommodate the number of people. And this could mean that there are several perpetrators of violence who could have returned home. And given the fall and the dip in the economy and people losing jobs, there has been a disruption of livelihood. And this needs to be viewed in the specific context of India, which has its own barriers in terms of class and caste. And disruption of livelihood, therefore, has a very gendered impact on the women. Coupled with this is the increased burden of housework, which too is quite gendered, which women across India are facing. As I mentioned, that there is a complete shutdown, there is no access to public transport, so women have been completely cut off support systems. Unlike a lot of places, India has not yet deemed shelters and other places as essential services, though there have been a lot of activists and organizations trying to get it implemented as an essential service. However, the cut off from such systems means that there has been an increase. Certain studies conducted by organizations and in collaboration with the media has led to this finding that in some states there has been an increase, while in some states there has been a decrease. There have been no calls being received from the helpline, which activists believe reveals that there are a lot of women out there who do not have access to helplines and authorities. And even the people who are reaching out to the National Commission of Women, they are doing it through emails and WhatsApp, which a majority of Indian women looking into the class and the caste barriers do not have easy access to. With the shutdown in the postal services, the National Commission of Women have actually stopped receiving complaints through post. So we yet don't know what the actual scenario of the number of cases is, as most people who are working in this field are of this firm belief that it's just the tip of the iceberg. A consensus among activists working in this field is that what this pandemic is bringing into picture is the fact that there is a lot of gender inequality and there's an unequal distribution of resources within family. This is there even in non-pandemic times, but it's usually brushed under the carpet by the society and the courtroom and the legal system. However, with the pandemic, this gender inequality and unequal distribution of resources is just coming into the limelight in much more stark terms. a very concerning example that I came across in one of these studies is about how families gave evidence of how they had provided N95 masks to their domestic help. And to put it in the context of India, domestic help usually are mostly women. However, when asked the women about these masks, they said that they had to give away these masks to their husbands so that, or to their partners, so that they could go out. And this reflects how there is a shortage of resources, and how when there's a shortage of resources, it is the women who are made to bear the burden of the shortage. So it is in this context that the situation in India needs to be viewed. There have been measures being taken to deal with this situation. At the center level, they're trying to launch new helplines, strengthen the existing ones, but of course with the caveat that not everyone would be having access to these helplines, especially considering the inequality in the distribution of internet and other facilities that exist in India, even in the non-pandemic times. There have also been courts which have taken cognizance of this issue and have looked at how different countries are dealing with the situation, and have come up with quite a range of directions, such as increase in online counseling, or designating informal safe spaces for women, designating shelter homes in empty hostels or academic institutions. However, the implementation level of this is yet to be seen. There are no reports on whether this is actually being implemented. There are certain states in India which are following up by calling women who have previously complained of domestic abuse. However, as you can see, these are only 2 states out of the 29 that we have. In yet another state, the local police is providing this option of putting men in institutional quarantine. However, once again, we do not know about the implementation level of it. So to wrap up, I would just like to point out that even in non-pandemic times, it is with great difficulty that the system tries to navigate and help the women. The courtrooms end up being places which negatively stereotype victims of sexual violence. But with this pandemic happening, and with the shortage of resources, with the shortage of jobs, and with an already failing legal system, it has highlighted a rise in these cases, and measures which are being taken to deal with this situation may or may not be implemented. So it is a very concerning time for us.